ticking time bombs of the apocalypse. These supervolcanoes could end the world. The sound of the mega eruption would be heard worldwide. Black rain falls, whole continents covered in ash, billions die because of failed harvests. Those are only two examples of media talking about volcanoes like the Yellowstone. But how true are these claims? Will the Yellowstone erupt and end the world as we know it? Let's take a look at it. However, basic stuff first. In the general sense, volcanism describes processes in which magma and gases rise into the Earth's crust and escape at the surface or into the atmosphere. There are three scenarios that can lead to volcanic activity. Number 1. Two continental plates drift apart each other, which leads to a crack forming in the crust. This crack is then filled by magma. A good example for this is Iceland. Number 2. One plate pushes underneath another. This leads to the rock heating up and melting. It is then pushed to the surface alongside water that often flows in, which leads to the formation of volatile gases. Volcanoes located at subduction zones produce the most volatile eruptions. Number 3. Interplate volcanism, commonly referred to as hotspot volcanism. This is a thermal melt anomaly, a plume of magma moving away from the core mantle border toward the surface, which itself is stationary. The plate above moves over the hotspot. A good example for such activity are the Hawaiian Islands as well as the Yellowstone itself. Now that we have a basic understanding about volcanism, it's time to take a look at our ticking time bomb. When media, TikTokers or Hollywood talk about the Yellowstone, they often call it a supervolcano, which obviously sounds pretty cool but is simply wrong. In science, the term supervolcano is an informal one. But generally speaking, it refers to all volcanoes capable of creating a super-eruption. Now, what is a super-eruption? This is quite simple. All eruptions that produce 1,000 or more than 1,000 cubic kilometers of volcanic material, or in other words, all eruptions that are an 8 on the Volcano Explosivity Index. This also leads us to the issue with the term supervolcano, mainly its tendency to mislead, as it can be assumed that these volcanoes only produce super-eruptions, which simply isn't true. The Yellowstone had 2 V8 eruptions in its history, while the Campi Flegrei in Italy never produced such an eruption. However, they are still considered to be a supervolcano. A term that can be instead applied to a supervolcano and also is more scientific would be caldera system, as this refers to any volcano that experiences an eruption large enough to collapse the surface into the partially emptied magma chamber. In the last chapter, I loosely mentioned the eruption history of the Yellowstone. Let's get into a brief rundown of it. The most recent activity happened 70,000 years ago, which was a simple lava flow. The latest big eruption was a V8 eruption 631,000 years ago. This one was followed by 18 non-explosive eruptions, most likely lava flows. Another V8 eruption happened 2.1 million years ago. It was followed by a V7 eruption 1.2 million years ago, which is often included when calculating the intervals between these eruptions. All the large eruptions happen in a time frame of 600 to 800,000 years from each other, which unfortunately leads to the belief the Yellowstone is overdue. However, this is untrue, as 1, we would still have a potential time frame of 100,000 years, and 2, a volcano simply doesn't work this way. Predicting the next super eruption based on 2 or 3 events is not a guarantee for the next large eruption happening in this time frame, as it's simply not a sufficient number of events and doesn't account for all other activity. The much stronger finishing argument for the overdue statement is that most caldera systems don't have a huge number of super-eruptions. 2 of them are already extremely rare, as it usually stays at 1. The Yellowstone having more than 2 V8 eruptions is highly unlikely. Yellowstone is one of the best monitored volcanoes on Earth. But how exactly do scientists monitor for volcanic activity? Generally speaking, there are 3 commonly used methods, which can be applied to all volcanoes. The most well-known is measuring seismic activity. The more seismic activity, the higher the activity of magma beneath the surface. The Yellowstone area is extremely active, with 1,200 to 2,500 earthquakes per year. Most of them cannot be perceived by humans, and earthquakes on their own also don't indicate that a volcano eruption is near. Another method is monitoring the caldera elevation. If magma accumulates underneath, it has no way to go except further up, which leads to the inflation of the ground above and ultimately to a release of magma. Similar to you inflating a balloon, if you put in too much air, it will eventually burst. The last method involves the monitoring of the gas density, more precisely carbon dioxide and helium, which are gases produced by magma. These factors combined are highly indicative whether a volcano erupts or not. Due to the fact that the Yellowstone caldera itself right now isn't rising and gas emissions remain quite stable, it's safe to assume there is no imminent eruption. But what if this changes? Giving a definitive prediction of the type of eruption is rather difficult. However, in this case, taking a look at past activity can help. The most probable eruption is a so-called hydrothermal eruption. In other words, an explosive release of heated water. The most probable classical volcanic activity is a lava flow, as we know it from volcanoes like the Mauna Kea, which would see smaller explosive eruptions. A highly volatile or super-eruption is the most unlikely scenario. Sorry, Hollywood and TikTok. Even if a super-eruption occurs, it would not mean that we would face a world-ending apocalypse. With our technology, it is rather difficult to predict how much the Earth would change, but some assumptions can be made. You would see changes in the global climate and weather, which is even impacted by smaller eruptions, such as the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. Human activity, mostly agriculture and air travel on the North American continent and a smaller degree globally, would be impacted. Speaking of worldwide famine is a bit difficult as well because it usually bases everything on how volcanic activity impacted humanity in the past. Our ways of producing and conserving food have been vastly improved since then. The spread of ash in the atmosphere will most definitely happen, which is also the reason for climate and weather changes. However, it's simply wrong to say that whole continents will be covered in ash, and not even the entire American continent will face such things. Claims of the Yellowstone being overdue for an eruption or ultimately being the reason for humanity's end are incorrect. Whilst they have some scientific base, they are usually incomplete and out of context. Instead of trusting sources like TikTok or the average tabloid, I would advise to go to official pages that document the information and don't rip things out of context. The best source for information about the Yellowstone and other volcanoes in the area is the USGS. I have a link in the description that will lead you to a spreadsheet with all sources used in the video. If you want, you can read some of it yourself, and even more than that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. More like it are coming, though it will take some time. Not all of them will be on geographical topics, as I will try to cover a variety of things. It would be cool if you could hit that subscribe button and like the video. If you have anything you want to share regarding the topic or some feedback on the video, don't hesitate to type it down in the comment section. With all that said, stay healthy and safe. Rob out.